The story begins with a man named David, who lived with his wife Emily and their son Ben. They notice that the weather outside has deteriorated significantly, with heavy rain and lightning, causing them to be quite frightened. David starts to feel that the storm might intensify, so he decides to take his wife and son to the basement of their house. They spend the entire night there. When David comes out in the morning, he sees that everything around them is devastated, indicating the storm's intensity was very high. David, Emily, and Ben then notice a strange fog coming from the direction of the mountains. It had rained heavily the previous night, and the fog is slowly advancing. David thinks that the area might now be dangerous, so he decides to head to the city. David's friend, Trent, is trying to get his car out because a tree had fallen on it. Despite numerous attempts, he is unable to succeed. When Trent learns that David and his family are heading to the city, he decides to join them as he also needs to go to the city. On their way, they notice many military officers and their vehicles heading towards the mountainous area. David asks Trent what the military officers might be doing on the mountain, and Trent explains that there might be a military base camp where strange experiments are conducted. Recently, Trent mentioned that there was news of a woman who saw a UFO crash on that mountain, and there were aliens inside the UFO who were alive. However, the military had kept this information secret and was conducting experiments on them. They are unsure of how much of this is true or false, so they hurry towards the city. David, Trent, and his family arrive at a supermarket where the place is crowded because, due to the storm, everyone feared that resources would run out, so people had already been stocking up on supplies. The atmosphere around was quite tense, as if the entire place was about to be destroyed. Shortly after, many military officers arrived at the scene, telling everyone to leave. Normal people were unaware of what was happening, but the officers clearly knew something. Suddenly, they saw an elderly man outside the supermarket who was badly injured. He warned everyone not to go into the fog because something in it would endanger them all. In no time, dense fog started spreading from the mountainous area, making it impossible to see anything. One frightened man tried to get away from the supermarket in his car, but the fog had spread everywhere, including the area around the car. The people inside the supermarket could hear the man's screams, which became so loud that everyone was terrified. However, no one understood what was in the fog. Panic set in, and then a massive earthquake struck. They couldn't make sense of what to do, so everyone sat down on the ground to avoid injury. As conditions started to normalize a bit, a woman among them said she needed to go outside to save her children, who were alone at home and might be in danger. Seeing the situation, no one else wanted to go outside. Out of necessity, the woman decided to go alone to rescue her children. She opened the supermarket door and ventured into the dense fog. Now, the dangerous fog had spread throughout the city. Everyone began praying for someone to save them and take them to a safe place. David's son, Ben, was terrified by all this, so David took him to the other side to comfort him. David then left his family and Trent and went inside to get a first aid kit. While walking, he reached the generator area, where a shutter was present. Suddenly, the shutter began to move as if someone was trying to open it from outside. The attack felt very powerful, making David very scared, and he quickly ran back to the others. Although David had warned everyone not to go inside because it could be dangerous, the generator also had a problem. Some employees went to check on it and discovered that it could only be fixed from outside. However, since the fog outside was dense and there could be something strange in it, none of them were willing to go out. Despite this, one young man decided to go outside and fix the generator. David immediately told them not to go out, as it could be dangerous. But the employees ignored his warnings and lifted the shutter. They were seeing the fog up close for the first time. As the young man tried to step outside, suddenly, a tentacle from a giant octopus emerged from the fog. The octopus was enormous, and its tentacle began to pull the young man in. David rushed to help the young man, pulling him from the tentacle. Although David called for others to help, they were too terrified to come near. Despite David's efforts, he was unable to save the young man. The tentacled creature pulled him in and killed him. David managed to cut off a small part of the tentacle with an axe and quickly closed the shutter, returning to the others in the supermarket. David informed them about the giant tentacled creature and warned them not to go into the generator room, as it meant inviting death. This increased the fear among the supermarket people. David told them that escaping from this place was extremely dangerous, and they had already encountered dangerous creatures in the fog. However, the supermarket manager and others did not believe him, so they decided to check the generator room again. There, they saw a tentacle of the dangerous creature. The creature looked very dangerous, and when touched, it started to move. But in the next moment, it suddenly converted into a liquid and flowed away. This was the first time the people had seen such a thing. Returning to the supermarket, they now believed David's warnings were true. There were definitely dangerous creatures in the fog that wanted to kill them. This revelation increased the fear among everyone, and they began to think they should not leave the supermarket. However, David's neighbor, Trent, was opposed and insisted that he would go outside, claiming that there was nothing out there and that they were only being scared. A few others joined Trent, so they prepared to leave. David warned them that it could be extremely dangerous and suggested they tie a rope around themselves so he could pull them back if needed. Trent and others followed this advice, tying ropes around themselves before heading outside. The fog was still thick and persistent. Suddenly, the rope began to pull, and everyone started shouting. David quickly pulled on the rope to save Trent, but when the rope came back, it contained Trent's severed body. Trent had been killed by someone. Seeing this with their own eyes, everyone was terrified and no longer wanted to leave the supermarket. The power was out because the generator was completely broken, so they turned on torches and covered the windows with some strange material to prevent the dangerous creatures outside from detecting their presence. But soon, strange, larger creatures began to appear on the glass. These insects were much larger than anything they had seen before. The situation worsened when even larger creatures arrived, presumably to eat the insects. They tried to break the glass as it was the only source of light. One man suggested that the creatures were being attracted by the light, and now that the generator had started up and electricity was back, the large creatures were breaking the glass to get inside. The small insects were equally deadly. One insect bit a lady, who died in agony, and a large creature completely devoured a man, killing him. Panic spread everywhere, and no one knew what to do to protect themselves. Inside the supermarket, there was a lady named Mrs. Diana. A small insect had started crawling on her body, but Diana began reciting some mantras related to God. Because of these prayers, the insect didn't harm her and flew away. Seeing this, the people in the supermarket began to believe that Mrs. Diana was a divine being. They thought Diana could communicate with God, and that's why the creatures weren't harming them. Diana had always been very spiritual and felt connected to God, believing that praying would protect them from the insects. Everyone began to respect Diana and view her as a higher being. Meanwhile, David, along with some plumbers and others, planned to fetch first aid supplies from a nearby medical store to help the injured. David and his team went to the medical store, where there was no electricity. Upon entering, they discovered a military officer trapped in a spider web. The web was extremely dangerous, and the officer's body was badly damaged, though he was still alive. It was unclear how long he would last. David and his team tried to rescue him, but the soldier could only say that it might be their fault and that everything happening was due to them. After saying this, strange spider-like creatures emerged from the officer's body. Large spiders soon appeared and began attacking everyone with their webs. One spider cast a web on a man's leg, severely burning it. The spider's webs contained some acidic substances that burned through human skin. For instance, when one spider cast its web on a man's face, it burned his mouth. Many people who had accompanied David were killed right there. Despite the danger, David managed to grab some medicines and quickly returned to the supermarket. He warned everyone not to go near that area and closed the chamber. The people inside the supermarket were so terrified that they refused to move because the broken glass meant that insects could enter at any moment. Inside the supermarket, there was also a soldier named Danny, who had recently been stationed in the mountainous area. David and the others began questioning Danny about what was really going on in that area, as they were very interested to know what existed there. The fog had started from that location, which David had seen with his own eyes, so he repeatedly asked Danny for details. Danny then explained that when he was sent to that area, he was only briefed about research indicating that other worlds exist around our own. To access these worlds, different portals were required, and they had found such a portal in the mountainous area. There were some obscure research projects that explored extraterrestrial life, and it was possible that the creatures had come through this portal. Upon hearing this, Diana became very angry. People had started to believe that Diana possessed natural powers that protected her from the creatures, and they followed her rules. Diana approached the soldier in a rage and accused him, saying that all these events were his fault. She claimed that he had tried to break God's natural form and brought dangerous species to Earth. And one day, it will surely come when these creatures will destroy human civilization. Mrs. Diana wanted to punish the soldier, so she said that they should eliminate him because it was his fault they were trapped and their lives were in danger. Mrs. Diana's words inspired one man, who immediately took a knife and stabbed the soldier in the stomach. The soldier was gravely injured, but David and several others who were against Diana's plan were present. They did not want the soldier to be killed in this manner. However, there were many more people influenced by Diana who turned against David, and they silenced him by killing him and his companions. Diana then severely injured the soldier and said that they should send him outside. Reluctantly, the soldier had to go outside. He was crying heavily and pleading to be allowed back into the supermarket, but suddenly a large creature emerged from the fog and killed him with its sharp claws. In no time, the creature took him far away. Everyone was so terrified that they had trouble sleeping that night. Although they wanted to escape, their problems were escalating, making it impossible to flee. The next morning, David gathered a few people and decided that he could not wait for death while trapped in this place. They needed to leave and find a safe location. Thus, they resolved to leave immediately. However, it seemed that Diana had overheard their plan and opposed it, declaring that no one would leave because going outside meant inviting death. She warned that if the creatures discovered their presence, they could come and attack. David insisted on leaving, but Mrs. Diana, who had gained considerable influence over many people, controlled the situation by saying that no one would be allowed to leave the supermarket. And now, using her power, she was telling her followers that they needed to sacrifice David's son, meaning that David's son should be taken outside and thrown just like the soldier was. David couldn't let his son die in such a manner, so he and the people with him began attacking those who followed Mrs. Diana. Although Mrs. Diana had no special abilities, after that moment, everyone started respecting her position. One of David's companions quickly drew a gun and shot Mrs. Diana because he knew that as long as Diana was alive, she would continue to influence people to force others to kill. Therefore, her death was the best outcome. Seizing the opportunity, David and his companions quickly moved into the dense fog outside the supermarket because staying inside was also not without danger. They decided to find a safer place. However, shortly after, they were attacked by various types of creatures, including dangerous flying insects and spiders. The number of David's companions decreased rapidly as they were killed by these creatures. David, with his son and 2 other people, took refuge in a car, hoping that they might be safe inside. David wanted to leave the area as soon as possible. While moving forward, he saw that his house had been completely destroyed and his wife had also died in a terrible manner. This devastated David, and he could hardly bear it. As they moved ahead, they suddenly felt the ground shaking. It wasn't an earthquake but a massive creature whose every step caused the earth to tremble. David and the others realized that the creatures they had experienced as an earthquake were entering the Earth's environment. These creatures were as large as the Eiffel Tower, colossal and terrifying. David decided to stop the car in place, as even a small mistake could be fatal. After passing the creature, David realized that the car's fuel had run out. This left everyone quite dispirited. And now, they had also given up hope because they kept encountering different types of creatures at every step. David and the others had decided that the creatures would kill them anyway, so there was no point in trying to escape, as the fog had spread far and wide, leaving no way out. David had a gun with 4 bullets and decided that rather than dying a horrific death at the hands of these creatures, it would be better to use the bullets to end their lives. The people in the car also agreed with this, as a quick death was much better than prolonged suffering. Then, from inside the car, there were 4 gunshots, meaning David had killed his own daughter and the remaining people in the car. After this, David slowly got out of the car, hoping that the creature would finish him off too. He heard someone approaching and thought it might be the large creature, but he soon realized that it was military tanks coming to rescue the people in trouble. The entire world's military had gathered to eliminate the creatures. They continued to fight the creatures and took the survivors to a safe place. Everyone in the supermarket was also rescued. Among those rescued was the lady who had left the supermarket at the beginning to save her children. She was also safely rescued and taken to a safe location with everyone else. David was completely bewildered, realizing that if he had waited a little longer, his son and many others might have been saved. But it was probably too late now. David was filled with deep regret and would never be able to forgive himself for this decision. He left the military officers to handle their work and stayed behind, crying for his son, as he had lost his entire family in one stroke. The combined military officers continued to fight against the creatures. And now, gradually, the fog began to lift, leading people to believe that perhaps the hotel had been closed. And so, our story ends in this manner.